Good morning, it's Tony from Street Church Ministries and The Inside Job. And if you're listening to this, you're watching our podcast called The Inside Job. Thanks for hopping on board. This is week 2 of our series that we cleverly entitled Lessons from the Least of These. So we're taking it right out of Matthew 25. It's the least of these text, and we're trying to figure this thing out, right? Listen, any lesson that I have learned in my life, I have not learned it because I have memorized it or I have gained knowledge in the subject or I have learned to articulate it or to teach it. I've learned it because I've become willing to take what I have learned and apply it into the fabric of my life, of the totality of my life, right? Of my thoughts, of my attitudes, of my actions, and of my behavior, right? So, I mean, it's like, is there anything worse than ordering a sub sandwich at a sub shop and asking them to put oil and vinegar and mayo on it, and then coming home and unwrapping it only to find out that there's no oil and vinegar or mayo on it? That's horrible. So this whole series is about apply the darn mayo to the bread, right? If we want to learn something, we need to be willing to apply it. So what I'm about to talk on, I'm just going to lay this out here. I think it's tough to swallow because it's really intense. And I hope that you see it the same way, okay? I'm just going to open it up and read from Matthew 25. I'm going to start in verse number 31, I'm sorry. And here we go. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered up before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates his sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father, and take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came and visited me." So, what's so intense about that? Well, let me, I think what we have to ask ourselves, this is the $64,000 question that we have to ask ourselves. In this text, is Jesus using hyperbole? Is it exaggerated language to prove a greater point? Or is he actually saying in some way, shape, or form, on some level, right now, the same God in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God, the same God who had no beginning, who had no reference point, that on some level I am experiencing hunger and thirst, need, loneliness, and sickness. That's the $64,000 question. And I think that in some way, shape, or form, in a way that I don't get, that I'll never get, and I don't think I'll understand it because God lives in the land of more. So what I mean by that is that he's more perfect than I could ever possibly fathom. He's more loving. He's more kind. He's more wrathful. He's more holy. He's more compassionate. He's more empathetic. He's more kind than my mind can conceive of. And because I believe this, I believe that on some level, Jesus is experiencing all of those things I just read. I mean, think about it. The same God who in Hebrews chapter 1, so Hebrews chapter 1 says this about Jesus. It says, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word." That same God who is sustaining or holding up life, all of life. Listen, I'm not too bright, but I know what the word all means, okay? All marine life, all animal life, all insect life, the hills, the valleys, the water, the oceans, the cosmos and the universe, every conceivable galaxy, that he's sustaining it all by his word, holding it all in his hands, that same God says, I have an empty stomach, I have a parched throat, I'm experiencing loneliness in a hospital bed because no one is visiting me. And right now I have an IV drip attached to me and I'm sick as a dog. That to me is a reach. That to me is tough to swallow. I'll be honest with you. Listen, it's not hard for me to look at life and and to look at the universe and how all of life is so intricate and so complicated and so unbelievably awesome. It's not hard for me to believe that it had a source, and that source is what we call God, the greatest of all good, right? That's not a reach for me. But what's a reach for me is to believe that same being can so identify with those who are going through it that he can say on some level, I am hungry, I am thirsty, I am lonely, I am needy, I am sick. That to me is unbelievable. But I believe that we need to merge the God of of Genesis 1 in the beginning and the God of Hebrews 1. He is the exact representation of his being, the radiance of God's glory, that we need to merge and splice that God with the God that we see in Matthew 25, because they are one in the same. Listen, right now there are angels. Revelation chapter 4 says there are these beings that are circling around the throne of Christ. And day and night they never cease saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, he who was, he who is, and he who is to come. That they do it every day, all day, and will do it for eternity. That same being that is being worshipped in that way is walking around experiencing hunger and thirst, and loneliness and sickness. What does that say about him? What does that say about him? It says that he truly lives in the land of more of everything that we can imagine, more of everything that we can fathom, more of everything that we can possibly conceive of, and we've all experienced all of those things, right? Everybody who is listening right now to me has on some level, went through hunger, or has been thirsty, or has been sick, or has been needy or lonely. We all have. Maybe we've never experienced the hunger of a person in a third world country. Maybe we have not known what it's like to be lonely as a person who lives inside of a nursing home, who has no family or friends ever visiting them. Maybe we've never been sick to the point of having our life just hanging by a thread inside of a hospital room. But on some level, we've all experienced that, right? And the charge is this, right? If we call ourselves Christians, we are calling ourselves little Christ, because that's what the word means, little Christ. And if we're calling ourselves little, Christ, then we have to learn to identify with those whom Jesus identifies with. And in this text, it says that he identifies with those who are going through it, who are sick, who are lonely, who are needy, who are languishing in prison, who are hungry, who are thirsty, right? And if we're not there yet, we can't just blame it on the fact that, oh, well, we're too busy, or I got to drive my kids to their soccer practice, or, I'm having a bad day at work and my boss is driving me crazy, or I can't pay my bills, or I'm going through depression or loneliness. Let's all put our violins back in our cases, put them underneath our beds, okay? Because it doesn't, because at the end of the day, it does not do us any good, and it does not do anybody else any, good, right? We we need to, if we're not there with identifying with those who Christ is identifying with here, the only reason that we are not there, it's not because of our issues or because, we, are too busy, or because our kids are driving us crazy, or because of the bills, or because of depression. The only reason why we are not there is because we are not there. And whatever we need to do to get there, or whatever we need not to do, we need to do, right? We can't blame it on anything, anyone else. The only reason why we are not there is because we are not there. And if we call ourselves little Christ, we have to get there. We have to identify with those whom Christ identifies with here. So, hey, listen, this is intense stuff, right? But, I, for one, I don't think this is hyperbole. And the reason why I don't is because I think Christ is bigger and blows out the boxes of how I think about him. I think he lives in the land of more. And in some way, shape, or form, he really does. He is really saying, I am experiencing all of these things of human suffering. Now you go out and you do something, and you do something about it. So next week, we are going to talk about that. We are going to talk about that word, about the word something. And we're going to see what God has to say to us. So, hey, listen, guys, until then, have a great week. And remember, put the mayo on the bread.